In a quiet little town tucked away in the southern part of the United States, life moved at its own pace. The streets were lined with old oak trees, and neighbors knew each other by name. But beneath the surface of this seemingly peaceful community, there was tension, especially between the police and some residents. For years, people had whispered about unfair treatment, particularly toward black families. It wasn't something most folks liked to talk about openly, but everyone felt it, in their own way. One afternoon, a young boy found himself caught in the middle of this simmering conflict without even realizing it. This kid, barely 14, was just like any other teenager trying to figure out his place in the world. He loved animals more than anything else. Whether it was watching videos about wild creatures or sketching pictures of them in his notebook, he spent hours lost in fascination. His favorite spot in town was the small pet shop on Main Street. The owner, an elderly man named Mr. Patel, always welcomed him warmly and let him spend time observing the exotic animals kept in glass tanks at the back of the store. On this particular day, after finishing school, the boy made his way to the pet shop as usual. As soon as he stepped inside, his eyes went straight to the enclosure holding a massive python. The snake lay coiled up lazily on a branch, its scales shimmering under the soft light. There was something mesmerizing about how calm yet powerful it looked. Without hesitation, the boy approached the tank, pressing his nose close to the glass. "Wow," he muttered under his breath, completely absorbed in the moment. Mr. Patel noticed the boy's excitement and smiled. "You really like that one, don't you?" he asked, walking over. The boy nodded eagerly. "It's amazing. I've never seen anything like it." Seeing his genuine interest, Mr. Patel decided to make the experience extra special. After ensuring all safety protocols were followed, he carefully took the snake out of the tank and placed it on a secure table. "Here," he said gently. "You can hold it if you want. Just be careful. It's strong." For the boy, this was a dream come true. With trembling hands, he reached out and touched the cool, smooth skin of the python. It felt both strange and wonderful, unlike anything he'd ever experienced before. For a few moments, nothing else mattered. It was just him and the snake, connected through curiosity and wonder. But what started as an innocent encounter was about to take a dramatic turn. Unbeknownst to the boy, someone else had entered the store, a police officer who prided himself on maintaining control in the neighborhood. Known for his tough demeanor, Officer Harris often patrolled the area, keeping a watchful eye on anyone he deemed suspicious. To him, seeing a black teenager handling a large snake didn't sit right. In his mind, it raised questions fueled not by logic but by prejudice. Without bothering to ask what was happening or why the boy was holding the snake, Officer Harris strode over. His boots echoed loudly against the tiled floor, drawing everyone's attention. Before the boy could react, the officer grabbed the snake from his hands and flung it toward him. "There you go," Harris barked, his voice dripping with mockery. "You two seem like a perfect match." The room froze. Mr. Patel stood speechless, unsure of how to respond. The boy, stunned and embarrassed, stumbled backward, his heart pounding. He didn't understand why this man, someone who was supposed to protect people, would treat him so cruelly. All he wanted to do was admire an animal he loved, but now he felt humiliated in front of everyone. As the reality of the situation sank in, the boy quickly handed the snake back to Mr. Patel and rushed out of the store, tears welling up in his eyes. He didn't stop until he reached home, where he collapsed onto his bed, replaying the incident over and over in his mind. How could someone act so mean-spirited? What had he done wrong? Little did the boy or Officer Harris know this wasn't going to end quietly. Back in the pet shop, whispers began spreading among customers. By evening, the story had traveled far beyond the walls of the tiny store, igniting conversations throughout the town. Parents shook their heads in disbelief, while kids listened wide-eyed, unable to comprehend why such cruelty existed. And somewhere, in the shadows of these discussions, a storm was brewing, one that would challenge the very foundations of trust and justice in the community. By the time the boy got home, his hands were still trembling. He couldn't shake off the feeling of shame and confusion that had settled deep inside him. Sitting on the edge of his bed, he stared at the floor, replaying every detail of what had just happened. The officer's harsh words echoed in his mind. You two seem like a perfect match. It wasn't just the act itself that stung. It was the tone, the mockery, the way it made him feel small and powerless. His mom noticed something was wrong as soon as she walked into the room. She had been busy preparing dinner when she saw her, son sitting there, unusually quiet. Normally, he'd be chatting about his day or showing her sketches from his notebook, but today, he barely looked up. Concerned, she sat down beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. At first, he didn't say anything. How could he explain something he didn't fully understand himself? But after a few moments, the words spilled out. Haltingly at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. He told her about the snake, the pet shop, and how excited he'd been to hold it for the first time. Then came the part about the officer, the grabbing, the throwing, the mocking. His voice cracked as he described the humiliation he felt, standing there in front of everyone while the man laughed at him. His mother listened intently, her expression growing darker with each word. Her heart ached for her son, but beneath the pain, anger began to simmer. This wasn't the first time she'd heard stories like this, not in their town, not in their family. But hearing it happen to her child made it hit differently. She hugged him tightly, trying to reassure him that none of this was his fault. "We'll figure this out," she said firmly. "Nobody gets to treat you like that." Later that evening, the boy's dad came home from work. A tall, composed man with a quiet strength about him, he worked in law enforcement himself, a fact that often put him in a complicated position when it came to discussions about police behavior. When his wife filled him in on what had happened, his usual calm demeanor faltered. His jaw tightened, and his eyes narrowed as he processed the details. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then, looking directly at his son, he asked, "Are you okay?" The boy nodded, though it was clear he wasn't entirely all right. There was a heaviness in his gaze, a mix of sadness and frustration that no teenager should have to carry. His father reached out and squeezed his shoulder, offering silent support. But inside he was seething, not only because someone had treated his child so poorly, but because he knew this wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a much larger pattern, one he'd dedicated his career to fighting against. That night, as the house grew quiet, the boy's father sat alone in his study thinking. He knew exactly who Officer Harris was. They'd crossed paths before during department meetings, though they weren't close. Harris had a reputation for being quick-tempered and dismissive, traits that often led to complaints from residents. What troubled the father most was how easily Harris seemed to let bias guide his actions, and now, his own son had become another, victim of that mindset. The next morning, news of the incident spread even further. Word traveled fast in their tight-knit community, especially when it involved something as shocking as this. People gathered in groups outside grocery stores, whispered about it at bus stops, and shared updates over coffee. Some expressed outrage, while others shrugged it off, saying things like, "That's just how he is," or "Kids probably shouldn't be handling snakes anyway." But for many black families in the neighborhood, the story struck a nerve. It wasn't just about one officer's bad behavior. It was about the broader message it sent, that your worth, your dignity, could be dismissed in an instant, based on the color of your skin. As the days passed, the tension in the town began to rise. Parents started talking to their children about what had happened, warning them to stay cautious around certain officers. Teachers noticed a shift in the classroom too. Students who normally kept to themselves suddenly became vocal, sharing their own experiences of being treated unfairly by authority figures. One high schooler stood up during a class discussion and said, "It's not just snakes, it's everything. They look at us and see trouble before we even open our mouths." Meanwhile, the boy tried to go back to his normal routine, but it wasn't easy. Every time he walked past the pet shop, memories of that afternoon flooded back. He avoided eye contact with anyone wearing a uniform, even though he knew not all officers were like Harris. Still, the fear lingered, making him question whether he belonged in spaces where he might stand out. Back at the police station, whispers about the incident reached Officer Harris. At first, he brushed it off, convinced that people were blowing things out of proportion. "I was just doing my job," he muttered to a colleague during lunch. "If I see something unsafe, I step in. End of story." But as more complaints rolled in from neighbors, store owners, and even some fellow officers, he began to realize the backlash wasn't going away anytime soon. For the boy's father, patience was running thin. He decided it was time to take action. First, he filed a formal complaint with the police department outlining exactly what had happened and demanding accountability. Then, knowing that paperwork alone wouldn't be enough, he prepared himself for a face-to-face confrontation with Officer Harris. As someone who understood the inner workings of law enforcement better than most, he knew how to navigate these situations. But this time it wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. When the two men finally met in a dimly lit conference room at the station, the air was thick with tension. Harris arrived first, arms crossed and posture defensive. The boy's father entered a few minutes later, his movements deliberate and measured. Without raising his voice, he began recounting the events of that day piece by piece. He mentioned the lack of communication, the unnecessary aggression, and the lasting impact it had on his son. Each word landed like a hammer blow, chipping away at Harris's confidence. At first, Harris tried to justify his actions, claiming he was simply following protocol. But as the conversation went on, cracks began to show in his argument. The boy's father pointed out inconsistencies in his story, citing specific policies and procedures that contradicted Harris's version of events. By the end of the meeting, Harris was visibly shaken. For the first time, he realized the weight of what he'd done and who he'd done it to. The fallout from this encounter rippled through the town, sparking debates about accountability, respect, and reform. While some defended Harris, arguing that mistakes happen, others saw this as a wake-up call. Protests erupted, led by community leaders determined to push for change. Even within the police department, voices began to rise, calling for better training and stricter oversight. Slowly but surely, the town started to confront the issues it had long ignored. For the boy, life gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. With encouragement from his parents, he found ways to channel his emotions into something positive. He began volunteering at local shelters, caring for animals, and teaching younger kids about compassion and empathy. Though the scars remained, he learned to carry them with grace, using his experience as fuel to make a difference. And for his father, the incident reinforced a truth he'd always believed. Justice isn't just about enforcing laws. It's about protecting people. In standing up for his son, he hadn't just sought revenge. He'd fought for a future where no child would have to endure what his did. The story of the snake may have started with cruelty, but it ended with courage, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope can shine through. The days following the incident felt heavy, like a storm cloud hanging low over the town. The boy's father couldn't shake the image of his son sitting on the edge of the bed, eyes filled with hurt and confusion. It wasn't just about what had happened in the pet shop. It was about the message it sent to the boy and others like him. That they didn't matter. That their dignity could be stripped away without a second thought. For a man who had spent years working within the system, this realization cut deep. He knew better than anyone how hard it was to trust law enforcement when trust was broken so carelessly. After filing the formal complaint, the boy's father decided to take matters into his own hands. He didn't want this to fade into the background, brushed aside as one of those things that people forgot about after a week or two. No, this needed to be addressed head-on, not just for his family, but for everyone in the community who had ever felt powerless against injustice. So he began making calls, reaching out to local leaders, pastors, teachers, and even journalists. He wanted people to know what had happened, not to shame Officer Harris publicly, but to shine a light on the bigger issue at play. Word spread quickly. By the end of the week, the story had made its way onto social media. A neighbor posted about it online, sharing her outrage and tagging local news outlets. Within hours, comments poured in from people across the town and beyond. Some expressed sympathy for the boy, calling him brave for speaking up. Others shared their own stories of mistreatment by police officers, revealing a pattern that stretched far beyond this single incident. One woman wrote, "This is why my son doesn't leave the house without me worrying about him." Another added, "It's exhausting living like you're guilty until proven innocent." As the conversation grew louder, so did the pressure on the police department. Calls started coming in, not just complaints, but demands for answers. Why hadn't anyone stopped Officer Harris before? What steps were being taken to ensure something like this wouldn't happen again? The chief of police, a gruff man in his late 50s, found himself cornered. He called an emergency meeting with his team, including Officer Harris, to discuss how to handle the growing backlash. During the meeting, tensions ran high. Some officers defended Harris, saying he was just doing his job, while others admitted privately that maybe he'd gone too far this time. The chief, trying to maintain order, reminded everyone that public perception mattered. "We can't afford to lose the community's trust," he said sternly. "Not now, not ever." But behind closed doors, he struggled with what to do next. Disciplining one of their own wasn't easy, especially when that person had been with the force for years. Meanwhile, the boy's father prepared for his face-to-face meeting with Officer Harris. It wasn't going to be easy. He knew Harris wasn't the type to back down easily, but he also knew the power of facts. Before heading to the station, he spent hours reviewing policies, procedures, and past incidents involving Harris. He highlighted inconsistencies in the officer's behavior and gathered statements from witnesses at the pet shop. By the time he walked into the conference room where they were set to meet, he was ready. Officer Harris arrived first, looking uneasy. He sat down at the table, arms crossed, clearly bracing himself for whatever was about to come. When the boy's father entered, there was a brief moment of silence. Then, without hesitation, the father began laying out the facts. His voice was calm but firm, each word chosen carefully. "You grabbed the snake out of my son's hands," he said, staring directly at Harris. "You threw it at him and mocked him in front of everyone. Tell me, what part of that was necessary?" Harris shifted uncomfortably in his seat. At first, he tried to defend himself, repeating the same lines he'd told his colleagues. "I thought it was unsafe. I was just doing my duty." But the boy's father wasn't having it. He pointed out that Mr. Patel, the store owner, had followed all safety protocols and that the snake posed no threat under those conditions. "So why did you feel the need to intervene?" he asked. "And why did you treat my son like he was less than human?" With every question, Harris's defenses began to crumble. He realized he was sitting across from someone who understood the system inside and out, someone who could see right through his excuses. For the first time, he started to feel the weight of what he'd done, not because he was afraid of losing his job, but because he was finally seeing the faces behind the policies he claimed to uphold. Faces like the boys. Outside the station, the town continued to buzz with activity. Protesters gathered near City Hall holding signs that read, "Justice for our kids," and "Enough is enough." Parents brought their children along, turning the event into both a demonstration and a teach-in. Speakers took turns addressing the crowd, sharing personal stories of discrimination and calling for systemic change. One mother held up a picture of her teenage daughter, tears streaming down her face as she spoke. "Every day I worry about her," she said. "Will she come home safe? Will she be treated fairly? These are questions no parent should have to ask." Inside the station, the meeting between the boy's father and Officer Harris came to an emotional close. Harris, visibly shaken, muttered an apology. Not because he was forced to, but because he genuinely seemed to understand the harm he'd caused. The boy's father accepted it, not because he forgave Harris completely, but because he knew apologies were only the first step toward real change. "Actions speak louder than words," he said as they stood to leave. "Let's see if you mean it." In the days that followed, the ripple effects of the confrontation became clear. The police department announced that Officer Harris would be suspended pending further investigation. They also promised to implement new training programs, focused on de-escalation and cultural sensitivity. While some residents felt these measures weren't enough, Others saw them as a start, a crack in the wall that might let hope seep through. For the boy, life slowly began to shift. Though the memory of the incident still lingered, he found solace in small victories. Neighbors stopped him on the street to say they admired his courage. Teachers encouraged him to keep pursuing his passion for animals, reminding him that his love for nature was a gift. And his parents, though still protective, allowed him to return to the pet shop under Mr. Patel's watchful eye. Slowly but surely he started to rebuild his confidence. But perhaps the most significant change came within the boy himself. Inspired by the support he received, he decided to use his voice to help others. He joined a youth group focused on advocating for fairness and equality, speaking at meetings and events whenever he could. One evening, standing in front of a packed auditorium, he shared his story with a mix of vulnerability and strength. "I didn't think anyone would listen," he admitted. "But now I know we can make a difference. Together." As the town continued to heal, conversations that had once been avoided were now happening openly. People talked about race, privilege, and accountability in ways they never had before. Some discussions were uncomfortable, even heated, but they were necessary. Change rarely comes without friction, and this town was learning that lesson firsthand. For the boy's father, watching his son find his footing again was bittersweet. On one hand, he was proud of the young man his child was becoming, resilient, compassionate, and determined to create a better world. On the other hand, he couldn't ignore the pain that had sparked this journey in the first place. Still, he held on to hope. Hope that one day, stories like theirs wouldn't exist anymore. Hope that the next generation would grow up in a world where respect and dignity weren't privileges, they were rights. And so the town moved forward, carrying the lessons of the past while striving for a brighter future. The boy, once humiliated and afraid, now stood tall, a symbol of resilience. His father, once burdened by frustration, now led with purpose. Together they proved that even in the face of cruelty, humanity has the power to rise above and transform pain into progress. The weeks that followed the incident became a turning point for the town. Conversations that had once been whispered in private were now loud and unapologetic, echoing through community meetings, school assemblies, and even grocery store aisles. People were no longer afraid to speak their minds, and the boy's story became a catalyst for deeper discussions about fairness, respect, and accountability. It wasn't just about one officer or one moment of cruelty. It was about a system that had allowed such behavior to go unchecked for far too long. The boy's father found himself at the center of it all. After his confrontation with Officer Harris, he became a voice people listened to, not because he demanded attention, but because his words carried weight. He spoke at town hall meetings, addressing crowds filled with concerned residents who wanted answers. His speeches weren't fiery or accusatory. Instead, they were calm and thoughtful, rooted in both personal experience and professional insight. "We're not here to tear anyone down," he often said. "We're here to build something better. For everyone." One evening during a packed meeting at the local library, a young woman stood up to share her perspective. She was a college student home for the summer, and she recounted an encounter she'd had with law enforcement years earlier. "I was walking home from the park when an officer stopped me," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "He asked me where I lived, like I didn't belong in my own neighborhood. I was 12. The room grew silent as she continued. That feeling never left me. The feeling of being watched, judged, treated like I wasn't good enough. Her story struck a chord with many in the audience, including the boy's father. He nodded slowly, recognizing the familiar thread of mistrust that ran through so many lives. Later that night, he approached her after the meeting ended. "Thank you for sharing," he said sincerely. "Stories like yours remind us why we can't give up." As momentum built, the protests outside City Hall evolved into something more organized. Community leaders worked together to draft a list of demands, focusing on areas like training reform, transparency, and improved communication between police officers and residents. They also called for regular forums where people could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. These efforts weren't met without resistance. Some argued that change would take too long or cost too much, but the persistence of those pushing for progress kept the movement alive. For the boy, life began to feel less heavy. With each passing day, he noticed small signs of support from unexpected places. A teacher handed him a book about famous animal conservationists, saying, "I thought this might inspire you." A neighbor stopped by to drop off homemade cookies, adding, "You're stronger than you think." Even Mr. Patel, the pet shop owner, made a point to greet him warmly whenever he visited, ensuring he felt welcome despite what had happened. Still, there were moments when doubt crept in. One afternoon, while flipping through channels on TV, the boy stumbled upon a news segment about the incident. The anchor described it briefly, mentioning allegations of misconduct before moving on to another story. Sitting cross-legged, on the couch, he felt a pang of frustration. To him, it wasn't just an allegation, it was his reality. But then he remembered something his dad had told him. Not everyone will understand your pain, and that's okay. What matters is how you respond. Determined to stay positive, the boy threw himself into activities that brought him joy. He started volunteering at a nearby animal shelter, helping care for abandoned pets and teaching younger kids how to interact with animals safely. Watching a shy child light up after holding a rabbit for the first time reminded him of his own love for creatures big and small. It also gave him a sense of purpose, a way to turn his hardship into something meaningful. Back at the police station, changes were underway. Officer Harris's suspension served as a wake-up call for the entire department. Training sessions focused on cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques became mandatory for all officers. Some grumbled about the extra work, but others embraced it, realizing how much they still had to learn. During one session, a veteran officer admitted, "I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I'll be the first to say I don't always get it right. But I'm willing to try." Despite these efforts, tensions remained high. Not everyone trusted that real change was happening. At a community forum held in the high school gymnasium, emotions boiled over when a resident stood up to challenge the chief of police. "How do we know this isn't just for show?" she demanded, her voice rising above the murmurs of the crowd. "What guarantees do we have that things won't go back to the way they were?" The chief, visibly uncomfortable, hesitated before responding. "You're right to ask that question," he finally said. "There are no guarantees. But I promise you this. We're committed to listening, learning, and improving. That starts today." Her skepticism lingered, but she nodded, satisfied that at least someone was willing to acknowledge the uncertainty. Progress, after all, wasn't perfect. It was messy, imperfect, and often slow, but it was happening. Meanwhile, the boy's father continued to push for broader reforms beyond the town limits. He reached out to advocacy groups in neighboring cities, sharing strategies and resources. Together, they organized workshops aimed at empowering young people to speak up against injustice. One Saturday morning, the boy tagged along to one of these events. As he listened to speakers talk about resilience and courage, he realized something important. He wasn't alone. There were others like him, young, hopeful, and determined to make a difference. By the end of the summer, the town looked different, not physically, but in spirit. Conversations that once divided people now brought them closer together. Parents openly discussed racism and bias with their children, equipping them with tools to navigate a world that wasn't always fair. Teachers incorporated lessons on empathy and understanding into their curriculums. Even some police officers joined community events, playing basketball with kids or handing out free ice cream at festivals. Through it all, the boy's family remained a pillar of strength. His mom encouraged him to keep drawing, reminding him that art was a powerful way to express emotions words couldn't capture. His dad, though busy with his advocacy work, made time to sit down and listen whenever the boy needed to talk. And the boy himself? He kept growing, not just in age, but in wisdom and confidence. He learned that setbacks were part of life, but so was resilience. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the boy sat on the porch with his dad. They watched leaves swirl in the breeze, enjoying a rare moment of quiet. Do you think things will ever really change? The boy asked, suddenly breaking the silence. His dad smiled softly. They already are, he replied. It's not going to happen overnight, but every step counts. And you, my son, are proof of that. The boy nodded, absorbing the words. For the first time in months, he felt a glimmer of peace, not because everything was fixed, but because he knew he was part of something bigger than himself. Something that mattered. And as the stars began to twinkle in the sky, the boy leaned back in his chair, letting hope settle in his heart. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't stop fighting for a world where kindness outweighed cruelty, where justice wasn't just a dream but a reality. The weeks turned into months, and the town began to settle into a new rhythm. While life hadn't returned to normal, because normal had been part of the problem, it felt like the community was inching toward something better. Change wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't fast, but small victories started adding up. The boy's story, once a source of pain, became a beacon of hope for others who had faced similar struggles. It reminded them that speaking up, no matter how hard it seemed, could spark a chain reaction. One chilly morning, the boy woke up feeling unusually restless. He'd been dreaming about snakes again. Not in a scary way, but as if they were calling him back to something he loved. After breakfast, he grabbed his notebook and headed outside, sketching pictures of animals while sitting on the front steps. His dad noticed this and smiled. "You miss it, don't you?" he asked, referring to the pet shop visits. The boy shrugged but didn't deny it. "I guess," he said quietly. "But it's not just about the snakes. I liked feeling free. There, you know?" His dad nodded, understanding completely. "Then let's go," he said simply. "Freedom shouldn't be taken away from anyone." Together, they walked to the pet shop later that afternoon. When they arrived, Mr. Patel greeted them warmly, clearly relieved to see the boy return. "It's good to have you back," he said with a grin. "Your spot by the tanks is waiting." For the first time in months, the boy felt a sense of belonging wash over him. He wandered through the aisles, marveling at the colorful fish, chirping birds, and slithering reptiles. Though the memory of what happened lingered, it didn't weigh as heavily as before. Instead, it fueled his determination to reclaim his joy. As he stood in front of the python's enclosure, watching its slow, deliberate movements, he realized something important. Fear only wins when you let it take control. And today, he refused to give in. Back at home, the boy decided to channel his passion for animals into something bigger. Inspired by his volunteer work at the shelter, he came up with an idea, a community project aimed at teaching kids about wildlife conservation. With help from his parents and local leaders, he pitched the idea to the town council. To his surprise, they loved it and offered to provide space in the recreation center for workshops. Within weeks, posters went up around town advertising the program, and soon enough, dozens of children signed up. On the first day of the workshop, the boy stood nervously in front of a group of eager faces. Some kids clutched notebooks, others bounced excitedly in their seats. Taking a deep breath, he introduced himself and explained why he cared so much about animals. "They're amazing creatures," he said, his voice growing steadier. "And learning about them helps us understand the world and each other better." As the sessions progressed, the boy found himself growing more confident. Teaching gave him a sense of purpose, and seeing the kids light up during activities made every moment worth it. One little girl, barely 6 years old, approached him after a lesson on turtles. "Are you going to save all the animals?" she asked innocently. He chuckled softly. "I wish I could," he replied. "But maybe together we can make a difference." Her wide-eyed nod stayed with him long after the session ended. It was a reminder that even the smallest actions could inspire big dreams. Meanwhile, the police department continued its efforts to rebuild trust. Officer Harris, still suspended, attended mandatory counseling sessions where he confronted his biases head-on. At first he resisted, insisting he'd done nothing wrong. But over time, guided by therapists and colleagues willing to listen, he began to see things differently. During one particularly raw session, he admitted, "I never thought about how my actions might affect someone else's life. I was too focused on proving I was tough. Though progress was slow, Harris's willingness to reflect earned him cautious respect from some within the department. Others remained skeptical, believing apologies needed to be backed by consistent behavior. Either way, the fact that he was trying mattered a lot. In the broader community, conversations shifted from anger to action. People started organizing events designed to bridge gaps between residents and law enforcement. One initiative, called Coffee with Cops, brought officers and citizens together for casual chats over coffee and pastries. At first, turnout was low, with both sides hesitant to engage. But as weeks passed, attendance grew. Folks discovered common ground in unexpected places, shared hobbies, mutual frustrations, or simple human connection. During one such gathering, a teenager approached an officer and asked hesitantly, "Do you ever get scared when you're working?" The officer paused, then nodded. "All the time," he admitted. "But knowing people are counting on me keeps me going." Their conversation lasted nearly half an hour, ending with a handshake and a promise to stay in touch. These moments, though small, added up. They chipped away at years of mistrust, replacing suspicion with understanding. Of course, challenges remained. Not everyone was ready to forgive or forget, and tensions occasionally flared. But the fact that people kept showing up for meetings, for protests, for coffee, proved that hope was stronger than fear. At school, the boy noticed subtle changes too. Teachers encouraged open discussions about fairness and equality, inviting guest speakers from advocacy groups to share their experiences. One day, a woman who worked with marginalized youth spoke passionately about resilience. "Life will knock you down," she said, "but getting back up, that's what makes you unstoppable." Her words resonated deeply with the boy. He realized that resilience wasn't just about bouncing back, it was about using your pain to create something meaningful. Whether it was through art, teaching, or standing up for what was right, every act of courage counted. By winter, the town buzzed with anticipation for an upcoming event, a unity march organized by local leaders. Flyers plastered across town read, "Together we rise," and featured artwork submitted by students, including one of the boys' sketches of a soaring bird. On the day of the march, hundreds of residents gathered in the park, bundled in coats and scarves. Signs bearing messages like "Justice for all" and "Love over hate" waved in the crisp air. As the crowd began to move through the streets, the boy walked alongside his family holding a sign that read, "Every voice matters." Strangers smiled at him, offering nods of encouragement. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly seen, not as a victim but as someone capable of making a difference. Later that evening, as the march concluded, the mayor addressed the crowd. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for our town," she said, her voice steady despite the cold. "We've listened, we've learned, and now it's time to act. Together, we can build a future rooted in fairness, compassion, and respect." Applause erupted, echoing through the frosty night. The boy looked around, taking in the sea of faces illuminated by streetlights. He saw neighbors, teachers, classmates, and even a few officers. Each person carried their own story, their own struggles. But for tonight, they stood united. Walking home afterward, the boy felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the hot chocolate his mom handed him. It was pride, not just in himself but in his community. They weren't perfect, and neither was he. But perfection wasn't the goal. Growth was, and growth, no matter how messy, was worth celebrating. That night, as he climbed into bed, he thought about everything that had happened since that fateful day in the pet shop. What started as a moment of cruelty had transformed into a journey of healing and discovery. He knew there would still be tough days ahead, times when doubt crept in or setbacks tested his resolve. But he also knew he wasn't alone. His family, his friends, and his community were walking beside him step by step. With those thoughts swirling in his mind, the boy drifted off to sleep, dreaming not of snakes this time, but of birds flying high above the clouds, free, fearless, and full of possibilities. As winter gave way to spring, the town seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The air felt lighter, not because all their problems had vanished, but because people were finally facing them together. Conversations that once simmered with tension now carried a tone of cautious optimism. It was as if the Unity March had planted seeds of hope, and those seeds were beginning to sprout, one small act of kindness or understanding at a time. The boy continued leading his workshops, which had grown in popularity. Kids of all ages flocked to the recreation center every Saturday morning, eager to learn about animals and the importance of caring for the environment. What started as a modest project had turned into something much bigger, a safe space where children could connect with nature and each other. Parents often lingered after the sessions, chatting among themselves about how proud they were of their kids, and sometimes even sharing stories of their own struggles and triumphs. One particular Saturday stood out. A new participant joined the group, a shy girl who rarely spoke and kept her head down most of the time. When it was her turn to introduce herself, she mumbled something so softly that no one could hear. Instead of pressing her, the boy smiled warmly and handed her a sketch pad. "If you don't want to talk, you can draw," he said gently. "Animals have a way of saying what we can't always put into words." By the end of the session, the girl had drawn a picture of a fox peeking out from behind tall grass. She held it up hesitantly, waiting for feedback. The room erupted in applause, and her face lit up with a smile so bright it melted away any trace of shyness. From that day forward, she became one of the most enthusiastic participants, always eager to share her artwork and ideas. Watching her, transformation reminded the boy of his own journey, how finding your voice in whatever form it takes can change everything. Meanwhile, Officer Harris returned to work under strict supervision. His colleagues kept a close eye on him, ensuring he adhered to the new protocols implemented by the department. Though some still distrusted him, others noticed subtle changes in his behavior. He began asking questions instead of jumping to conclusions, taking time to listen before reacting. During one patrol, he stopped to help an elderly woman carry groceries inside her house. A simple gesture, but one that left a lasting impression on both her and the neighbors who witnessed it. Word of these efforts reached the boy's father, who remained skeptical yet open-minded. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he told his wife one evening over dinner. "But I'll give credit where it's due. If he's trying, that's worth acknowledging." His wife nodded thoughtfully. "It's not forgiveness," she added. "It's progress." Spring brought another milestone for the town, the launch of a mentorship program pairing officers with local youth. The idea came from a brainstorming session between community leaders and police officials, sparked by the success of initiatives like Coffee with Cops. At first, there was resistance on both sides. Young people worried about being judged, while officers feared rejection. But as pairs began meeting regularly, bonds formed in unexpected ways. One officer, assigned to mentor a teenage boy passionate about basketball, discovered they shared a love for the game. They started playing together at the park, laughing and trash-talking like old friends. Another officer bonded with a high school senior over gardening, helping her plant flowers in her backyard. These connections might have seemed small, but they mattered deeply. They showed that trust wasn't built through grand gestures. It grew from moments of genuine connection. For the boy, life continued to unfold in surprising and fulfilling ways. Inspired by the success of his workshops, he decided to expand the program beyond wildlife conservation. With support from teachers and parents, he introduced a storytelling component, encouraging participants to write or draw about their experiences. Some shared tales of overcoming fear. Others talked about finding beauty in unlikely places. Each story added a layer of richness to the project, turning it into a tapestry of resilience and creativity. One afternoon, as the group gathered to share their latest creations, a young boy stood up holding a painting of two hands reaching toward each other across a divide. "This is me and my dad," he explained, pointing to one hand. "And this is my teacher," he said, indicating the other. "We didn't understand each other at first, but now we do." The room fell silent, everyone moved by the simplicity and depth of his message. The boy leading the workshop clapped slowly, breaking the silence. "That's exactly what we're here for," he said, "to build bridges, one step at a time." By early summer, the town celebrated its first annual Day of Unity, a festival designed to honor the progress made over the past year. Booths lined the streets offering crafts, food, and activities for families. Local musicians performed on a makeshift stage, their songs echoing themes of hope and togetherness. At the heart of the event stood a mural painted by volunteers, including the boy and his friends. It depicted a tree with roots stretching deep into the ground and branches reaching skyward, symbolizing growth and strength. During the closing ceremony, the mayor invited the boy to say a few words. Standing before a crowd of hundreds, he took a deep breath and began speaking. "A lot has changed since last year," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in his chest. "But the biggest change isn't in the rules or the programs, it's in us. We've learned to listen, to care, and to stand up for what's right. And that's something no one can take away." The applause that followed was thunderous, filled with cheers and whistles. As the boy stepped down from the stage, his parents enveloped him in a tight hug. For a moment, nothing else mattered. Not the cameras flashing, not the reporters jotting notes, not the challenges that still lay ahead. All that mattered was the love and pride radiating from those around him. Later that night, as fireworks lit up the sky, the boy sat on the grass with his family, watching bursts of color reflect off the lake. His mom leaned over and whispered, "You've done something incredible, sweetheart, never forget that." He smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. The town, and he himself, was stronger than ever. Together, they had faced adversity and emerged on the other side, ready to keep building a world rooted in kindness, fairness, and respect. And as the final firework exploded above them, painting the night with golden sparks, the boy closed his eyes and whispered silently, "Thank you." Not just to his family or his community, but to the journey itself. The highs, the lows, and everything in between. That had shaped him into the person he was becoming. As summer rolled on, the town continued to hum with energy. The Day of Unity festival had left a lasting impression, not just as an event, but as a reminder of how far they'd come, and how much further they still had to go. People weren't naive enough to think that one celebration could erase years of tension or solve all their problems. But it gave them something tangible to hold on to, proof that change was possible if they worked together. The boy, now more confident than ever, found himself stepping into a leadership role he hadn't anticipated. His workshops weren't just about animals anymore. They were about connection, resilience, and finding strength in vulnerability. Kids who once hesitated to speak up began sharing their stories openly, knowing they wouldn't be judged. Parents often lingered after sessions, asking questions or offering thanks. One mother pulled him aside one afternoon, tears in her eyes. "You've given my son a voice," she said. "He talks about you like you're his hero." The boy didn't see himself as a hero, though. He knew he was just someone trying to make sense of the world just like everyone else. Still, hearing those words made him realize the impact of what he was doing. It wasn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It was about showing up day after day and saying, I'm here. Let's figure this out together." Meanwhile, Officer Harris's journey toward redemption remained complicated. While some residents acknowledged his efforts to improve, others couldn't bring themselves to trust him again. At a community meeting held in the library, a man stood up and addressed the room. "I appreciate that he's trying," he said, glancing briefly at Harris, "but actions matter more than words. We need to see consistency before we can move forward." Harris nodded slowly, accepting the criticism without defensiveness. He understood that rebuilding trust wasn't something he could rush. It required patience, humility, and a willingness to face hard truths. During one counseling session, he admitted to his therapist, I used to think I knew everything about this job. Now I realize I don't even know half of it, and maybe that's okay. His growing self-awareness earned him cautious respect from some colleagues, particularly younger officers eager to learn from his mistakes. One evening, during a training seminar, a rookie approached him after class. "How do you handle moments when you feel stuck?" she asked hesitantly. Harris thought for a moment before replying. "You admit you're stuck. Then you ask for help. That's the hardest part, but also the most important." These small interactions added up, creating ripples of change within the department. Officers started holding each other accountable in ways they hadn't before, calling out biased language or unfair treatment when they saw it. It wasn't always comfortable, but discomfort often paved the way for growth. For the boy's family, life felt fuller somehow. Conversations around the dinner table revolved less around fear and frustration and more around hope and possibility. The boy's dad continued advocating for reform, speaking at conferences and writing articles about the importance of accountability in law enforcement. His mom threw herself into organizing community events, ensuring there were spaces where people could come together without pretense or agenda. One such event took place on a warm July evening, a neighborhood cookout hosted in the park. Families brought dishes to share, filling long tables with plates of fried chicken, macaroni salad, and homemade pies. Kids ran barefoot through the grass, chasing fireflies as the sun dipped below the horizon. Officers mingled among the crowd, laughing and swapping stories with residents. For a few hours, the divisions that had once seemed insurmountable faded into the background. During the cookout, the boy struck up a conversation with a girl slightly older than him. She introduced herself as someone who volunteered at the local food bank, explaining how helping others had taught her the value of empathy. "It's easy to judge people when you don't know their story," she said. "But once you do, it's hard to stay angry." Her words resonated deeply with the boy. He realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing to see the humanity in others even when it was difficult. As they talked, he felt a sense of camaraderie he hadn't expected, a reminder that healing often came from unexpected places. By late summer, the town buzzed with excitement over another milestone, the unveiling of a permanent mural near City Hall. Designed collaboratively by artists of all ages, it depicted scenes of unity, hands clasped together, children playing under a rainbow, and a tree with roots shaped like hearts. The boy played a key role in its creation, contributing sketches and helping paint sections alongside volunteers. On the day of the unveiling, hundreds gathered to celebrate. Local leaders spoke passionately about the power of art to inspire change, while musicians performed songs written specifically for the occasion. When the cover was finally removed, revealing the vibrant masterpiece beneath, the crowd erupted in cheers. The boy stood quietly off to the side, watching as people snapped photos and pointed out details they loved. Later, as the crowd dispersed, a reporter approached him for an interview. "What does this mural mean to you?" she asked, microphone in hand. He thought for a moment before answering. "It means we're stronger together," he said simply. "Every color, every brushstroke, it's a piece of someone's story. And when you put them all together, you get something beautiful." The camera crew moved on to interview others, leaving the boy standing alone for a moment. As he gazed at the mural, he reflected on how much had changed since that day in the pet shop. Back then, he'd felt powerless, like the world was against him. Now he realized that power came not from fighting alone, but from lifting others up. Together, they had turned pain into purpose. That night, as fireworks lit up the sky for a second time that summer, the boy sat with his family on their porch, sipping lemonade and listening to the distant pops and crackles. His dad leaned back, in his chair, staring at the stars. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "we've been through a lot. But I think the best is yet to come." The boy smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but he trusted that whatever challenges arose, they would face them together. As a family, as a community, and as individuals committed to making the world a little brighter. And as the last firework faded into darkness, leaving behind a quiet stillness. The boy whispered softly to himself, "We're unstoppable." As autumn approached, the town settled into a rhythm that felt steadier, more grounded. The leaves turned shades of amber and gold, painting the streets with color, while cooler breezes hinted at the approaching winter. Life wasn't perfect. Far from it. But there was a sense of progress, like they were climbing a steep hill together, step by step. For the boy, this season marked a turning point, not just in how he saw himself, but in how others saw him too. By now, his workshops had become a staple of the community. Kids looked forward to Saturdays when they could gather at the recreation center to learn, create, and share their stories. Parents often lingered outside, chatting among themselves or helping set up tables for snacks. It wasn't unusual to hear laughter spilling out onto the sidewalk, mingling with the sound of pencils scratching against paper or excited voices talking about animals. What started as a small project had grown into something much bigger, a safe haven where everyone belonged. One crisp Saturday morning, a new face appeared at the workshop. A tall, lanky teenager with shaggy hair and an air of quiet uncertainty. He hovered near the door, unsure whether to come in. The boy noticed him immediately and walked over, extending a hand. "Hey," he said warmly. "You're welcome here." The newcomer hesitated before shaking his hand. "I'm not really good at stuff like this," he admitted, gesturing vaguely toward the art supplies on the table. "That's okay," the boy replied with a grin. "None of us are experts. Just try. That's all anyone can ask." Over time, the teenager opened up, revealing a sharp mind and a knack for storytelling. His drawings depicted fantastical creatures, half-bird, half-lion hybrids soaring above mountains, but each piece carried a deeper meaning. When asked about them, he explained, "They're kind of like me, trying to figure out who I am, you." "No." The boy nodded, understanding completely. Watching the teenager find confidence reminded him of his own journey, how he'd once struggled to reclaim his voice after feeling silenced. Now, he realized, he was helping others do the same. It was a cycle of resilience, one person lifting another until they both stood taller. Meanwhile, Officer Harris continued navigating the delicate path toward redemption. Though some residents remained wary, others began offering small gestures of goodwill. A nod of acknowledgement at the grocery store, a polite thank you during traffic stops. These moments might have seemed insignificant, but to Harris they meant everything. They were reminders that people weren't defined solely by their worst actions. They could grow, change, and earn trust again. During one patrol, Harris encountered a young mother struggling to carry groceries into her apartment. Without hesitation, he offered to help, stacking bags neatly on her counter. As he turned to leave, she stopped him. "Thank you," she said softly. "It means a lot." Her words stayed with him long after he left, fueling his determination to keep improving. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but he could shape the future, one kind act at a time. For the boy's family, life felt richer somehow. Conversations around the dinner table revolved less around fear and frustration, and more around dreams and possibilities. The boy's dad kept pushing for reforms, speaking at conferences and collaborating with advocacy groups across the country. His mom organized events aimed at fostering connection, from book clubs to gardening projects. Together, they created a home filled with love, laughter, and unwavering support. One evening, as the family sat on the porch watching the sunset, the boy's dad broke the silence. "Do you remember what you said last summer?" he asked, looking at his son. "About being unstoppable?" The boy nodded, smiling faintly. "Yeah, why?" "Because you've proven it," his dad replied, his voice thick with pride. "You've shown this town and yourself that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about moving forward even when you are." Tears welled up in the boy's eyes, though he blinked them away quickly. He didn't feel like a hero, but he understood now that bravery came in many forms. Sometimes it looked like standing up to injustice. Other times it looked like teaching kids to draw or helping neighbors plant flowers. Whatever shape it took, it mattered. As fall deepened, The town prepared for its annual harvest festival, a tradition that brought everyone together. Booths lined Main Street, selling homemade jams, scarves, and pumpkin pies. Kids raced through, hay bales, giggling as they searched for hidden treasures during scavenger hunts. Officers handed out candy to trick-or-treaters early, their badges glinting in the sunlight. For a few hours, the weight of the world lifted, replaced by joy and connection. During the festival, the boy spotted Officer Harris handing balloons to children. Their eyes met briefly, and Harris offered a small smile before turning back to the crowd. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was acceptance. And sometimes, that was enough. Later that night, as the festival wound down, the boy found himself sitting alone on a bench overlooking the lake. Reflections of lanterns danced across the water, casting soft ripples of light. He thought about everything that had happened since that fateful day in the pet shop. The pain, the growth, the unexpected friendships. He realized that while the incident had changed him, it hadn't broken him. Instead, it had shaped him into someone stronger, braver, and more compassionate. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead, pulling him from his thoughts. As he stood to leave, he glanced back at the shimmering lake one last time. In that moment, he felt a profound sense of peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because he knew he was part of something bigger than himself. Something hopeful. Walking. Home under a canopy of stars, the boy whispered softly to himself. We've got this. Not just him, not just his family, but the entire town. Together they had faced adversity and emerged stronger. And as long as they kept showing up, for each other, for justice, for kindness, they would continue rising, unstoppable and unshakable.